morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure today to introduce our keynote speaker, U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. Throughout his more than 30 years in public service, Senator Whitehouse has been a dedicated champion fighting every day for smart solutions that are good for people, our economy, and the planet. As a member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, he plays a key role in crafting policies addressing climate change and environmental protection. He has earned a lifetime score of 97% on the League of Conservation Voters National Environmental Scorecard. And as we know, in a Congress fraught with inaction, Senator Whitehouse speaks out each week on the Senate floor to compel his colleagues to move forward and address climate change. His weekly Time to Wake Up speeches remind his colleagues and all of us that the cost of inaction is too high for our communities, our children, and our futures. As a co-founder of the Bicameral Task Force on Climate Change, Senator Whitehouse is working with leaders across governments and the private sector to craft policies that will reduce our carbon emissions. Last year, Senator Whitehouse introduced legislation to put a fee on carbon, establishing a market incentive to reduce emissions while generating substantial revenue to be returned to the American people. Senator Whitehouse served as Rhode Island's U.S. Attorney and State Attorney General before being elected to the U.S. Senate in 2006. In addition to Environment and Public Works, he is a member of the Budget Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and the Special Committee on Aging. Please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome, and it is time to wake up. Thank you.
Thank you, Alia. Thank you, Alia, and good morning, everyone. The schedule, I guess, for me is that I will make a few comments for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then take any questions or comments that you may have for another 15 minutes, just to orient you to that. And what I'd like to say in my 10 minutes is first, what an important role investors can have in this conversation. And the first reason that it's important to you is an obvious one to you already, which is that it's really important to the people who invest with you that you get this right. The people who went into coal a couple of years ago, before that 98% drop that was mentioned already this morning, have some questions about why wasn't I told? And throughout the fossil fuel industry, I think you see a similar liability. Coal is the leading edge, but the predicament for the industry is that if it follows the coal strategy of being truculent and obtuse and relying on political machinations to try to get out of the problem that it's in rather than addressing the problem, you end up with a very abrupt shift and a very calamitous loss of value. And there are people in the natural gas and oil sectors who are looking at that as a preview of coming attractions and figuring there has to be a better way. So that's one piece. The second is that climate change is such a big deal as it plays itself out that even if you're not investing in the fossil fuel industry, there's virtually no industry that isn't at some point likely to be affected by it for good or ill. On balance, it's more likely to be ill, but there will be some for whom it is good. And so it's very important that people be sensitive to that. There is a very significant propaganda effort by the fossil fuel interests to talk down climate change and to suggest that it's tree huggers and alarmists and so forth. Obviously, our military disagrees, every single national laboratory disagrees, every single American major scientific society disagrees, every single major state university disagrees, but they have the ear of Congress and they continue to pump out their nonsense. And that creates an environment which the public might not be as attuned to these shifts as it needs to be. So it's really important, just from a perspective of advising your investors properly, that you pay real attention to this. The second point that I'd make that relates to that is that as investors, the folks you invest in have certain responsibilities to you, which include to tell the truth when they tell you things, and to warn you of known and foreseen risks. For the fossil fuel industry, their business model, at least with respect to politics, has been to lie, and indeed to create a very elaborate array of front groups so that their fingerprints aren't as clearly on the nonsense about climate science that's being put out. And there's a lot of work being done on this now. Robert Brule at Drexel University, Riley Dunlap at the University of Oklahoma, Justin Farrell at Yale, Naomi Ortiz, who not only does the research but wrote a book. Jane Mayer's book touches on it, although she's not a scientist per se. There's lots of work that is looking at what these people call the climate change counter movement or the denial apparatus. So when you're an industry that has invested that much in being dishonest and dishonorable about what the facts are, trying to create a false alternative reality that they can use for political purposes, it's very easy for that strategy to bleed into your relationship with investors and to be untruthful with them, because it's what you are as a general proposition with everybody who comes to you on that subject. So that's something to be on guard against, but it also makes you and the investment community a very powerful weapon to force the truth out of companies that don't want to tell it, which is why Attorney General Schneiderman's investigation under the New York Martin Act is so significant, along with, I think, there are up to 17 other attorneys general involved, and I hope at some point the Department of Justice will measure up to its responsibilities and take a look at this as well. Let me not talk about your world, which you actually know better than I do, but talk a little bit about my world, having made those points about your world. In my world, you need to understand that we were making considerable progress on doing something about climate change until 2010. Over and over again, there were bipartisan bills that came up that addressed climate change as an issue. If you were a patient, you would have seen a regular heartbeat on the screen of bipartisan climate activity in Congress until 2010, and then flatlined. What happened in 2010 that flatlined it? The United States Supreme Court rendered a decision called Citizens United, which allowed special interests to spend unlimited amounts of money in American politics. And the fossil fuel industry was very quick to respond. And it's for that reason that you see front groups for them, like Americans for Prosperity, saying very publicly, here's $750 million that we're going to spend on attack ads and political organization in this one election. And by the way, as a senator, they've just said, we're done with Trump. We're going to put all that money, all that's left we haven't spent already, into Senate races. So that's a very real threat. When you're in my business and you look around and somebody pops up and says, we're spending $750 million in this election, that gets everybody's attention. And they further say that if you cross us on climate change, you will be, and I'm quoting them, severely disadvantaged, or I'm quoting them again, in political peril. That is not subtle. And the message was received. And they didn't go after Democrats, they went after Republicans. They went after the Republican defectors and shut them down. And that explains why there has been no progress since 2010 in Congress. My view is that there are between 12 and 20 Republican senators who would love to get on a good climate bill. But at this point, their political reality makes it very dangerous and challenging for them to do that. And it's always easier to wait one more day than bite the bullet of taking on that kind of a risk and that kind of a challenge today. And so they wait, and they procrastinate, and maybe after my primary, and let me try to figure out how I can do this, and so forth. But the two things that have made this so apparent, first is that the fossil fuel industry is very aggressive in the Senate and in Congress. You may have read statements by CEOs saying, we understand that climate change is real, we take it seriously, we believe that there should be a price on carbon. Total hogwash. That might get them through a cocktail party at Davos, but the political operation that they run is still telling everybody, don't believe that nonsense, it's your ass if you cross us. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Petroleum Institute, Americans for Prosperity, and a whole array of these political organizations are completely and vehemently opposed to getting anything done on climate. So a Republican senator trying to get there knows that they're going to run into that buzzsaw. They're being told that not just by the public statement I mentioned about $750 million, but in all the private conversations that they have with lobbyists. On the other side are the great American companies that are really terrific on climate change. And there are lots of them, 160 that have signed up for the President's Act on Climate Pledge to support the Paris Accords. They're terrific. Walmart, Coke and Pepsi, Nike, VF Industries, Apple, Google, Unilever, Mars, General Mills. The list goes on and on and on. There are big American corporations, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs. They do all that, but when they come to Congress, climate change is not their issue. The week before we left on our last recess, which will be now 3 weeks ago, I was lobbied by TechNet, which is mostly tech corporations, Apple, Google, and so forth, but it's got a big slice of green energy corporations. I was lobbied by the lumber industry. Rhode Island does not have a big lumber industry, but they came in to see me anyway. And by the property casualty insurance industry, which writes the checks when the extreme weather comes home. Each organization had a list of its lobby topics to go over with us in Congress. And of the three, you know how many had doing something about climate change on their lobbying list? 0, not one. If the lumber industry isn't going to do it, if the property casualty insurance industry isn't going to do it, and if the TechNet folks, including green energy companies, aren't going to do it, who do you think is going to show up? And you can't win a game where you don't show up on the field. So as investors, you have the ability to ask some really good questions of companies you invest in. How does your advocacy in Washington align with your policy? And if it doesn't align, then I think that is a question that should be asked. And for most of them, it's not going to align. My favorite example is Coke and Pepsi. Unbelievably good companies from a climate change point of view. Fabulous. But they lobby through something called the American Beverage Association. They did $30 million worth of lobbying when there was a suggestion that the Affordable Care Act would be funded by soda taxes. As soon as that threat disappeared thanks to $30 million in lobbying, they went back to flatline. They do not lobby. They are a zero presence on climate change in Congress. Worse, the American Beverage Association sits on the board of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which has been totally made captive to fossil fuel industries and is relentlessly opposed to anybody doing anything about climate change. So Coke and Pepsi, these bastions, these stalwarts, these champions on climate, when they come to Congress, actually have a lobbying presence that is net negative on doing anything about climate. And that, I think, is a problem that can be solved. I'll close by saying this. The reason always was, when I spoke to companies fossil fuel industry and the Republican Party become so intertwined that if they cross the fossil fuel industry, Republican leaders in Congress will find ways to punish them for doing so, and on behalf of their shareholders, it's not fair to take such a risk. Okay. One antelope can be taken down fairly easily by the hyenas. But right now, the corporate sector has safety in numbers. If they simply take the folks that are active, or even a subset of the folks that were active in the Act on Climate Pledge, and decide that they're going to do something about lobbying in Congress. We can do this. The reason that I'm so passionate about this is that I see how tantalizingly close we are. I know the Republican senators who want to jump the fence. We know what the escape car is that they want. It's a revenue-neutral, border-adjustable carbon fee, and we have one. But talking to them about escape, they get very anxious. And they've got to figure out a way to get safely over the fence and out to the car, the getaway car. They don't need perfect safety. But somebody has got to tell them, if you do this, we will have your back. And right now, nobody who they trust is telling them that. So you have a real opportunity to help push the corporate sector to take that step, to show up in Congress, to match their advocacy with their existing policy, they don't have to change their mind, and to do it safely by doing it in numbers. And if we do, this will change very suddenly. It is ready to go. It is an artificial obstruction that blocks us right now, and when that collapses, things can happen way faster than most people think. So I'll leave you with that, and thank you very much. I'm happy to take a few comments or questions.
You're one of our heroes. Thank you for your leadership. A lot of people in this room do know about the bill that you and my senator, Senator Schatz, introduced, the American Opportunity Carbon Fee Act. We would love to have a list of those 12 to 20 Republicans. Because in all seriousness, we go to the Hill and we have a lot of great relationships with people on your side, and on the other side are folks we would like to start chipping away at. We know that they've received instructions not to do anything on your bill.
Yep.
But we know that relationship building takes time, and we would like to do that. So we understand that we have to go into the belly of the beast and try to work it. So any advice that you can give us on who would be the most sympathetic ears for us to approach on the other side would be helpful to us. Because your bill is really terrific,
Yep.
and we know it's not the only one, but we really like it.
You've got senators from Maine, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Illinois. You've got candidates coming up on the Republican side in Florida. You've got senators in Arizona who have been good on this in the past. You've got senators in Tennessee who have been good on this in the past. You can look at the senators who have signed up for some of the votes that we've forced them to take. You can look at the small environmental Republican Senate discussion group. You can look at past practice and statements. Jeff Flake of Arizona at one point wrote an op-ed in the Arizona newspapers for a carbon fee. So there's a pretty good track record of who is there. And then you've got people like John Bozeman is a very decent person. And I believe that Arkansas doesn't have a huge fossil fuel industry. It's not penned in by constituent concerns. If Walmart, which is good on these issues and is headquartered in Arkansas, would take John aside and say, come spend a day with us. Let me show you everything we're doing about climate change, how deadly seriously we take it. And by the way, this is the key point, let me assure you that when those hooligans come after you, we will have your back. I think that opens things up for him. Coke could have the same conversation with Johnny Isaacson in Georgia. VF Industries could have the same conversation with Tom Tillis and Richard Burr in North Carolina. There are a few tough holdouts. I don't think anybody's going to convert, for Barrasso right away. But even for them, there's a moment when the worm turns, and they realize that you're never going to go back to the good old days. And between a coal industry type calamitous collapse and a carbon fee that allows every coal miner that ever swung a pick to be put on their pension now fully funded with health care and all the benefits, and create some other things to make life in Wyoming easier as they transition away from a state that has a third of its revenues from fossil fuel, this becomes the solution. And so we're hoping very much we can tip it, but getting that first group is possible, and there's my list for you of some of the obvious ones.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
My question is what numbers of centrists in the House and the Senate, what number do you think needs to be in those centrist groups before, and provided that groups like Citizens Climate Lobby deliver some of the political will to offset the fossil fuel industry, what numbers do you think need to be generated before the tipping point is reached to where we will have a price on carbon?
It's not quite that simple, but one obvious benchmark is that you need to be able to get to 60 in the Senate in order to get cloture, if you have to. And you need to be able to get to a majority in the House. That's your sort of baseline requirement. The higher requirement is that you have to get the Speaker and the Majority Leader to be willing to bring up a bill. And that's going to require some pressure from inside the caucus, which could be less than the number to get to 60, and it could be more than the number to get to 60. When I say it could be less than, if Mitch McConnell believes that his continuation as Majority Leader depends on Portman, Kirk, Ayotte, and Johnson winning their races, and it looks like this is an issue that's going to take them down, they're on the bubble and this is close, and that would be a very, very significant fact in his world apart from the numbers. So the baseline would be 60 in the Senate, majority in the House, and then there's a combination of intensity, consequence, and numerosity that is the factor that's necessary to get them to bring something to the floor. Now, of course, if we take back the Senate and if we have a Democratic president, we can drive that conversation a lot harder and make it a lot more difficult for the leadership not to do that. In case we take back the Senate, we obviously would consider it. We have that seat.
Good morning, Senator. Thank you for your time and your work year-round.
My pleasure.
My name is Ali Elstein, and I just started at Young Brands. And so I wanted to say we were at Capitol Hill Day yesterday and having that conversation, but we are new to the space of climate change. And Ceres had a great bicep event last night with Congressman Corbello from Florida, yes. And Pepsi was there. Pepsi was speaking with the congressman and talking about their support for climate change. But one of the messages that came across was that the congressman is having difficulty finding people to really take part in this bipartisan climate change caucus that I think was just mentioned. And I was just wondering, why aren't more congressmen participating in that dialogue? How can we support it? Because it felt like we were there at that meeting of all these companies speaking with the congressman, and it felt like there was nothing that we could say to move things forward. And so as someone who's new to this space, it would just be interesting to hear your feedback on how to effectively participate in that dialogue to make sure that our voice can bring people to the table.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody here has had a chance to see Hamilton yet. There's one of the songs is about being in the room where it happens. There are two levels of conversation in Washington. One is when you show up at a Ceres and Bicep event, and they are truly terrific. And somebody from the company comes and says, "We like what you're doing, we are with you." That's all fine. But when Pepsi actually comes to do its lobbying work in Congress, that's a different conversation. That's the room where it happens. And in that room, what the members of Congress are hearing is from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Petroleum Institute, Americans for Prosperity, and a whole array of other similar groups, you are dead to us if you touch this. This is a third rail. You'll have primaries, you'll never get any money from us again, we may come after you, we want no part of you. Don't you dare. And on the other side of the coin, Pepsi is not there saying, don't worry about those clowns, we will have your back. And I'm part of a coalition of 60 major American companies, and we will have your back if you act consistent with your principles. So they need to take it from the cocktail party circuit in Washington and move it into the room where it happens when they're sitting down with the congressman and chief of staff, and they're actually willing to say to them, we got your back on this. That's the difference.
So you're saying the financial contribution is what's missing, and that's the only way for our
Yeah,
office to
and the
happen.
willingness to say that we'll be there. I mean, if Walmart says something really goes all in Arkansas for something, that's going to make a big difference, for Coke in Georgia and so forth. One last, sorry.
Hi, I'm Heidi Welsh from the Sustainable Investments Institute, and currently, and as you said, there's a lot more money floating around and sloshing around actually in the lobbying space from companies than there is in elections, even though the election stuff is eye-popping. But there's currently attention to the effort to get SEC mandated political spending disclosures by companies. What's your realistic assessment of that? Because all the folks that I've talked to who have a very sort of realpolitik view of it is, yeah, but that's really not going to happen. So do you think there's a chance of that, or is it still too much of a third rail for the SEC to touch?
I think we need a new SEC chairman. That would happen, but it absolutely positively should happen. The problem is, and you're here in Washington, you may not be very attuned to Washington. It's not always as simple as it looks. And I would hazard this to you. Look at today's newspapers and look at the efforts that are being made to impeach the IRS commissioner. Why? Of all things, why? Well, these groups that mostly are the anti-climate change groups work very powerfully because of Citizens United through dark money operations, through 501c4s, through the very types of machinery that the SEC would require them to disclose if it entered that rule. Without that weaponry, without those devices, their power goes back to where it was before 2010. They really don't want that. Humiliating and intimidating the IRS commissioner constantly is a good way to keep an already timid bureaucracy really in a fetal position. And that means it's less likely to investigate 501c4s. It's less likely to make a referral to the Department of Justice for the statements under oath where they tell the IRS that we don't get involved in politics, and the statements under oath that they tell the Federal Election Commission that we spent $70 million on political campaigns. That's what I call a false statement as a former United States attorney, but IRS doesn't, they could step forward and push that matter. So when you see the world as it is, you can see that there's an enormous amount of pressure to protect these political devices. This is not an unconnected set of things that are happening at random. This is the biggest power grab in recent American history, being done mostly subterranean to the American public and desperate to defend itself against any light or exposure. So on that happy note, join the